Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavita. I will be your host for today's program. And today we have a very exciting program because what we're going to look at is basically the 100 days of Trump. In other words, what did he do 100 days in office? And here's what we came up with. At least this is what at least this is what the internet came up with. First of all, how about 143 executive orders, almost a record in modern time. He also created Doge, which we discussed quite often in our programming. He removed us from the World Health Organization. That's got to be interesting. He banned transgenders from women's sports. Now remember, these are executive orders. He froze foreign aid to a lot of countries. What did he do in 100 days? Mount McKinley. He changed it from Mount Denali to Mount McKinley, Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He did this. He used English as now the USA's official language, at least according to the executive orders. He instituted tariffs all over the place, like in every country. He passed the Laken-Riley Act to give ICE more power. He also did this. He created the Trump Gold Card. You can come to the United States, but drop your $5 million off first. Deportations, 36,660 of them. Department of Equity and Inclusion, all gone. He added 177,000 jobs, and we have a new budget spent, which we'll go over more in detail next week. Spending was going to be discretionary spending down 163 billion, but it looks like he has some spending that's going up. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, to give us the report on Trump for the 100 days. David, those are just a couple of things that happened on this whirlwind of Donald Trump in the next 100 days. I wonder what you have to share with our audience relating to this.
Well, a number of things, and hopefully we'll have some guest commentators come on with us. Let's start off with Trump clearly had a game plan that he wanted to be able to execute when he became president. He has gotten off to the fastest start of any president probably ever. He has issued more executive orders in the first 100 days than any president ever. People also need to understand the difference between executive orders, legislation, and the Constitution. Executive orders basically represent the president's policy preference. And to the extent that it doesn't contradict law or the Constitution, then people in the executive branch need to follow it. But to the extent that he tries to do something through executive order that is contrary to existing law or the Constitution, then it obviously does not have the force of law and ultimately would have to be dealt with through the judicial system. And to the extent that you're dealing with the Constitution, then that would be the Supreme Court. And let me give you some examples. There are a number of contracts and grants that came to the attention of DOGE that are contrary to the president's policies. Whether it be DEI or whether it be the type of grants that are being given to international organizations or countries. And so therefore, DOGE recommended to terminate those contracts and grants. And to the extent that they weren't earmarked, in other words, directed by the Congress, then you can do that. However, only Congress can cut spending. So in other words, they can end up not giving that contract to whomever it was, or not giving that grant to whomever it was, but they still have to spend the money. So they have to spend it on something else unless they ask Congress for a rescission, and Congress grants that rescission within a 45-day period of time. And they haven't done that yet. And so as a result, a lot of these things are differences in policy rather than things that are illegal or fraud or whatever else. And so that's one example. Another example is the president issued an executive order to change birthright citizenship, to say that at least one of the parents has to be a citizen of the United States. Now, from a personal standpoint, I think that makes sense. At the same point in time, I don't think that's something that you can do through an executive order. I think at a minimum, that's going to take legislation, potentially a constitutional amendment, but I would argue you ought to be able to do it via legislation because the language in the Constitution is not so express that it couldn't be subject to some interpretation legislatively, but we'll see. But let's start with the economy because this show is supposed to be about economics. Let me give you some facts. I know that's something that a lot of times politicians don't like to do, or to the extent they do, they cherry pick the facts and misrepresent them. So let's start off with the big number, GDP, the economy. The economy contracted by 0.3% in the first quarter based upon the first estimate. Now that, there are going to be other estimates. They could be revised. It could turn out that it turns positive because 0.3% is not very significant. But, the fact is the preliminary number is the economy contracted by 0.3% in the first quarter. That compares with an increase of 2.4% in the fourth quarter of calendar 2024. Secondly, inflation. Inflation is at 2.4%, which is down from 3% in January when he took office. So inflation has come down a little bit. But then you have to look at the subsets. Keep in mind, core inflation doesn't count energy and food, which you would say they're pretty essential, but nonetheless, core inflation doesn't count that. And so let's look at energy and food. Well, oil prices are down about 20% since he took office, and egg prices went up and now down, and they're down about 40% since he took office. But they went up for a period of time before Easter, and you can imagine supply and demand, if you will. That's part of what economics is all about. But now it's down about 40%. They're down about 40% since he took office. But overall food inflation is 3%, which is up from about 2.5% when he took office. And of course, the Fed's target rate is 2%. Unemployment, 4.2%, up from 4% in January of 2025, but we're right at full employment. Labor force participation is up 0.1%, 62.6%, up from 62.5. Real wages are up from 2024. New jobs have been added last month, which was for April, 177,000 new jobs, 51,000 in healthcare. That part of the economy continues to grow. 9,000 less in the federal government, but more in government overall because state and local government more than offset the contraction at the federal level. Spending, federal spending is up from 2024. Deficits are up from 2024. Consumer confidence is down from the fourth quarter of 2024. In addition to that, we've got trade deficits are up significantly from 2024. Tariffs are up significantly between April versus March because of the new announced tariff policy, a lot of which have been suspended, but not the ones for China and not the 10% across the board for everything. But to give you a sense on the significance of that, it's estimated that we collected about $16 billion in tariffs in April of 2025, up from $10 billion. But we're running a deficit of $2 trillion a year. So it's really rather insignificant, if you will, in the overall scheme of things. What about the stock markets? Well, the Dow is down about 6% since Inauguration Day. The S&P is down about 6%, and the NASDAQ is down about 9%. That's as of last Friday. Does not consider any market activity today. And so I think when you talk about the economy, the message is very mixed. And the things that people are most concerned about right now, which I think will affect the future, is what's going to happen with regard to tariffs. What's going to happen with regard to our budget process? Okay, And how is that going to affect consumer spending and investor confidence? Those are unknowns. And so I think, a mixed record with regard to the economy, some positives, some negatives, but a lot of uncertainty. And with uncertainty gets volatility and reduced investments. And so we really need to get this tariff situation resolved as quickly as we can. We need to start putting our finances in order. Frankly, the bill that's before the Congress now, the budget reconciliation, it makes things worse, not better, no matter what people tell you, as compared to current law. And so we'll have to see what comes out of the sausage factory. I will say, however, that the president deserves an A on border security. He's done an outstanding job in securing the border. It did not take legislation. It took guts and commitment. On the international front, he's trying very hard to try to come up with, a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine and a ceasefire for a period of time in order to make that agreement a reality. That has not transpired. Things have gotten better with regard to the Gaza situation. Things have gotten better with regard to the Red Sea. He's trying to engage with Iran to deal with their nuclear ambitions. But those are incompletes. They're A for effort, but ultimately what counts is results, and we haven't seen any concrete results yet with regard to Iran and with regard to Russia, Ukraine, if you will. So, those would be a few comments that I would make to start out, and hopefully we've got some other people to be able to join us. So, turn it back to you, Nick.
Oh, we always do have people to join us. We'll have Sasha Starr will be coming in, who also hosts the show out of Ukraine with Ukraine, Russia, and we also have Mark Lee, but he has his finger up, so I don't know if it means he wants in or wants out.
I had a question. That's what I had.
I had a question, so you want in? All right, just want to make sure.
And it was a very simple question because I know that definitely back in the day and everything, Dave was involved in this whole idea of the no label party and everything like that. And I was watching on social media, and there were some folks in Michigan because the 100-day rally was in Michigan, and apparently there are some efforts in Michigan because there are people that are frustrated both with the Republicans and the Democrats, and they are frustrated by what's going on with the budget, so they are launching similar kinds of campaigns. So we're going to see more of this kind of effort around the country. That is my question for you, David, because I did see that there was a candidate, and I forgot what she was running under, but it's a kind of like a common sense type deal, but she was frustrated at both parties, and therefore she wanted to run under her own ticket.
Well, first, I hope you had the proper finger raised, Mark. Yes. But in any event, the answer at first, no labels was not a party. Right. No labels was a movement to try to be able to provide a third option for president and vice president for the American people. That did not manifest itself. It should have. I think it was a missed opportunity, but we need to look forward rather than back. There are a number of different efforts underway right now, Mark, to be able to encourage more independent candidates. Right. There are a number of minor parties that already exist out there. The Libertarian Party, the Green Party, the Reform Party. I mean, I could go on. There are a number of minor parties that exist. There are some people who believe that we need to have a viable third party option, where you have critical mass that can compete effectively with the Democrats and the Republicans. As you probably know, the Democrats and Republicans have both been losing market share. Mm-hmm. They both have less than 30% of registered voters, and now unaffiliated voters represent a little over 50% of registered voters. They tend to decide elections. I'm an independent, and one of the things that's most frustrating to me about that is while independents decide who wins races, they don't necessarily have a seat at the table when they end up wanting to create so-called bipartisan commissions and bipartisan efforts, when in reality, a majority of voters don't want anything to do with either one of the parties, okay? So I think the fact is you're going to see more efforts to try to support unaffiliated candidates and or candidates that have a duty of loyalty to the country rather than their party, and that represent more of the what I call the sensible center. I think about 60% of the country is center right, center left. You got about 20% on the far right, about 20% on the far left. And there's a feeling that the vast majority of the people that are in Congress today are not in the sensible center. And that's where you get solutions. Sasha, I see you have your phone.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you, remember this 2016 when Trump took over the Republican Party and controls it up till now and probably in the near future. So why someone who is as Trump being outsider cannot take over Democratic Party and use it as his platform and his minded people and run it that way instead of creating a new party which would have to compete both with Democrats and Republicans?
Well, some people think Trump effectively controls both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party, about all they have right now is anti-Trump. So whatever Trump wants, the Democratic Party doesn't want, right? I think, look, Trump cannot run again for a third term, no matter what anybody says. There's zero chance that 3/4 of the states would ratify an amendment that would create an opportunity for him to have a third term. He's going to have to turn over the reins. At the same point in time, he could still have significant influence. I mean, I look at Barack Obama. Barack Obama was a 2-term president. He couldn't run again, but he had significant influence over the Biden administration. And if you look at the composition of a lot of the staff of the Biden administration, a lot of them came from the Obama administration. So, the real test is going to be what's going to happen in the midterms, because obviously president is the most important political office. But right now, the Republicans have control of the Senate, the House, and the White House, which gives them an ability to try to get a lot of things done, within the first 2 years of his presidency. But the situation could be very different, after the midterm elections, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Hey, Dave, along those same lines and everything, a lot of talk has been going on around the notion of the budget. I know that you have managed in your past to actually be parts of things where the budget was balanced. I think it was under the Clinton administration and everything like that. But there seems to be a lot of give and take. And I think that's where the frustration is with people, is that they are trying to understand the importance of the federal budget and also if the budget can ever be balanced again. So I was wondering, as an expert in this field, your take on this, because that's what I'm hearing when I look at social media. A lot of people that are frustrated, both at the Republicans and the Democrats, because they're going like, we just want a balanced budget. Can you please give us a balanced budget?
Well, the first 4 years that I was Comptroller General, 98, 99, 2000, and 2001, we had surpluses. That's a term that many people may not be familiar with, and hopefully and not anytime soon. Okay. And in 2000, 2001, we actually paid down debt. Clinton was president for three of those years, and Bush 43 was president for one of those years. We all know what happened on September 11th, 2001, and the implication that had on the budget starting in 2002. You've heard me say many times that 3 things happened in 2003 that led me to believe that things were out of touch and out of control. Second round of tax cuts didn't come close to paying for themselves. Invaded a sovereign nation without declaring a war for the purpose of changing the government. Cost thousands of lives, trillions of dollars, created a void in the Middle East, and eliminated a counter to Iran. And then expansion of Medicare prescription drugs, which added another $8 trillion in unfunded obligations when it was already underfunded $19 trillion. That's when I really started peaking out to a much greater extent. Things are much worse now. We don't need to balance the budget. Here's what we need to do. What we need to do is we need to get debt as a percentage of the economy down to a reasonable and sustainable level. It's too high now. It's projected to go a lot higher. And why do I say debt to GDP? Because, not all debt's bad. Sometimes you got to run debt, but too much debt is, okay? And, it stifles economic growth. It undercuts individual opportunity. It raises interest rates, puts pressure for more inflation. squeezes the budget to where you can't spend money on things that you should spend money on, because after all, what do you get for interest? Nothing. It's paying for past excess consumption. So as a result, we need to do that, and that's what I advocate for, and that's the constitutional amendment I advocate for. I advocate for a limit as to how much debt as a percentage of the economy. That's pro-growth, because if you grow the denominator faster than the numerator, even if the numerator is going up, you're still making progress. Okay, but we're too high and need to head higher. There's not a party of fiscal responsibility. Neither the Republicans or Democrats. The Republicans, want to keep taxes as low as possible. Well, that's nice, but you got to pay your bills, right? The Democrats don't want to cut spending as much as needs to be. Both of them don't want to touch Social Security and Medicare. You have to, because those programs are going to go insolvent if you don't end up reforming them. You need to make them solvent, sustainable, secure, and you need to be able to not only assure those programs are going to stand the test of time, but you've got to be able to deal with the debt to GDP problem, and those programs are part of that challenge. That needs to be addressed if we want our future to be better than our past. So those are a few thoughts. Hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't, feel free to come back.
Yeah, you did answer most of it. Just really quickly, and I know Sasha's probably got some thoughts on this as well. You mentioned a succession plan, and I think even Nick kind of alluded to it earlier, but I did hear that, I guess in an interview recently, it might have been this weekend, that President Trump said that he would be open to the idea of a Rubio-Vance, or I guess it would be Vance-Rubio ticket as being the successor. So I just wanted your thoughts of that and everything like that, because you're right, he can't run a second term, but I guess he's trying to pass the mantle on to his vice president, with possibly Rubio being the vice president. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, it would be his third term if he ran, and that's what he's precluded from doing. You can't have more than 2 terms, whether they're consecutive or not consecutive, doesn't matter. Look, I think that J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio are clearly highly qualified individuals, okay? But there are a number of other highly qualified individuals, including some more in the cabinet, including some governors as well. Every senator looks in the mirror and thinks they're going to be president, but some potentially could be, and some are former governors, right? I mean, most every senator that I know that's been a governor in the past says that governor is infinitely better job than senator and much more relevant to being president of the United States, because it's executive rather than legislative activities, if you will. So I think Trump will have significant influence over his successor will be, but I think it will be a competitive process.
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to be able to say, I want X to be my successor and guarantee that X will be his successor.
That makes sense. Just really quickly on that same line, our governor here in North Carolina, or former governor, is being tossed around on the Democratic side. So it'll be interesting to see whether Cooper actually gets any traction. But I do know that he's been tossed around on the Democratic.
Well, my personal view is that the Democrats need to find a centrist governor from a purple or red state to be viable. And some examples would be Andy Beshear from Kentucky, Shapiro from Pennsylvania, your former governor Cooper from North Carolina, and Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of person that's got a chance to win on a national basis. To the extent that you're dealing with governors from deep blue states like California or Illinois or New York, that dog don't hunt nationally because their own states are in terrible shape. Okay. And to the extent that you're dealing with the legislators, there's a world of difference between being a legislator and being an executive. AOC may be a great bartender. Never had one of her drinks. But she's got zero executive experience, even though she may have a lot of charisma and may be attractive.
Yeah. Dave, another question relating to economics. People are concerned. We have our consumer confidence is down, like you mentioned. Are we going to pull out of this tariff craziness, because the latest thing, he put 100% tariffs on movies. And that was the thing that he did over the weekend. They aren't made in the United States. I'm not sure how he's going to, how they're going to manage it, because parts of movies are made not in the United States, then parts are. So, but what's going to happen with these tariffs? Are we going to see the end in sight, or is this going to be a total chaos that continues on? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, most of the tariffs he put on pause for 90 days, right? And so my view is he needs to get these things resolved before the summer break. And the summer break is in August. You know, he also needs to get, you know, the budget reconciliation process resolved before the summer break, which is August. You know, the real challenge is going to be China. You know, that's going to be the real challenge. I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic that, you know, with regard to our other major trading partners, you know, such as India, Japan, South Korea, the European Union, UK, et cetera, and hopefully Canada and Mexico, that we're going to come to some reasonable resolution of this, because, you know, what was proposed was not reciprocity. It did not make sense. Oh, by the way, the trade deficit's gone way up, you know, since 2024, and you know, and they're, you know, people don't really understand how the trade deficit works. But you know, the bottom line is he needs to get it resolved, I believe, before the summer recess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about the budget? We're going to be discussing this a little bit more next week, but how can we work a budget when you have to dedicate almost $1 trillion a year just to interest on the debt? How can we manage that with such a huge amount of your taxpayer dollars just going to interest on the debt?
Well, let's talk about some macro numbers, okay? Roughly 75% of direct spending is so-called mandatory spending, which means we've written a blank check. We have to pay whatever we have to pay, because as a matter of law, you have to pay based upon eligibility. And obviously, there are things that you can and should do to eliminate fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And that's one of the things that DOGE was trying to do. And that can end up helping to save some money, but a small fraction of what's necessary to be able to ensure the solvency and sustainability of those programs, and fiscal sanity and sustainability over time. So that means that what Congress argues about every year is the roughly 25% of spending that is so-called discretionary, that they set appropriations for every year. And you know, about half of that is for defense, at least historically it has been. And so you've got defense, non-defense. You know, unfortunately, Congress doesn't do its job in a timely manner. The last time it got its job done with regard to the budget and appropriations bills by the beginning of the fiscal year was 96. It's only done it 4 times in my lifetime. You know, and that's the only thing that's an express and enumerated responsibility for the Congress to do every year. They're not going to get it done. They didn't get it done this year. They're not going to get it done next year. All right. So they ultimately need to get their act together. But in addition to direct spending, you've got another $1.8, $1.9 trillion in tax expenditures, deductions, exemptions, credits, exclusions. We've written a blank check on that. So the truth is, by the time you end up adding direct and indirect mandatory spending, less than 15% of the budget is controlled. And by the way, yeah, mandatory spending includes interest which is our second biggest expense and our fastest growing expense. Our biggest expense is Social Security. Interest is second, but it's our fastest growing expense, for which you get nothing. And if you look at the budget that's being talked about right now for the current fiscal year, we're over halfway through the year, it makes things worse as compared to current law.
Yeah, and also remember when they created Doge, okay, and it looks like Elon's going to be walking away from Doge at the end of this month, so he's not going to be there. But my prediction on the show was he's not going to be able to cut 2 trillion. I went through the entire budget and I was going, there's absolutely no way. So it looks like they've settled on this number, which is 163 billion. That's not even close, as they would say, to 2 trillion. Is Doge going to be able to do anything more, or is 163 billion?
Well, I've got an opinion piece that's going to be published this week in The Hill, which is a major publication inside the way. Yeah. And it's about Doge. Okay. And they started out with a $2 trillion goal, then a $1 trillion goal, then a $500 million goal. They assert that they've saved $163 billion. They haven't saved but a very small fraction of that because of what I've said before. Only Congress can cut spending, they've got to send rescissions up for Congress to be able to approve if they want to cut that spending. And the only thing that they can unilaterally do to try to be able to reduce immediate spending is hiring freezes and RIFs, reductions in force. They had about 70,000 people take the early out program where they stay on the payroll through the end of the fiscal year, September 30, and get all pay and benefits through September 30. So basically a long-term paid vacation, right? That doesn't save money this year. It will save money next year. Okay. For every 10,000 people, you save, maybe $1 billion, by the time you count benefits, maybe, billion and a half. All right. So 70,000 times that is, 10 billion or so, if you will, depending on whether you count benefits and what the average wage is. But, 10 billion compared to 2 trillion is nothing. I mean, it's peanuts, right? So, what you have to do is you've got to do the two things that I said. Three things, actually. You've got to have a much more strategic and transformational review of what government's doing, how it does it, who does it, at what level of government, et cetera. You've got to have the statutory commission, and you've got to have a constitutional amendment. You need to have all three of those things if you really want to solve the problem. And if you don't have those three things, you're not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, just quickly along those same lines, maybe you can clarify, because you said a fiscal date that is different than the one that I thought most people used and everything like that, because I was always under the impression that the fiscal calendar ended on July 1st, because that's actually my birthday and not that far from the Canadian Canadian Independence Day, which is July 4th, if I remember correctly. And actually, I think it's July 1st too, if I remember correctly. Everything, but Sasha can correct me. And then you said September 30th. And then you also mentioned earlier this notion that Social Security and our Medicaid would have to be cut. And I know a lot of people are regretting that, particularly those that are over 60. And if they're pushing their 70 or 80, as my parents are, and everything like that, then they are, well, actually, they're in their 80s, then they're definitely fearful of that notion. So what can you say to alleviate people's fears of those kind of like things that people don't want to see being cut?
Well, several things. One, the end of the fiscal year for the federal government is September 30.
Okay.
Many states have June 30 as the end of their fiscal year. That could be what you're thinking of.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, July 4th is U.S. Independence Day.
Right.
Sasha can tell us what Canada is. Okay.
July 1st.
July 1st. So it's close. Hey, we got that going for us. Okay.
I thought it was my birthday.
With regard to prospective happy birthday, with regard to cutting, Trump has been very clear that he is not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Okay. And that he's not going to cut Social Security. But let me tell you the reality. The reality is, if you don't do anything on Social Security and Medicare, when their trust funds run out, which in the case of Social Security is less than 9 years, then benefits will be cut automatically across the board about 21%. That's how the law works. So if you do nothing, that's what you get. And that's why I'm saying we need to do something, right? Because nobody's for that. Nobody's for a 21% cut. On Medicare, for the hospital insurance program, if you do nothing in a little bit longer period of time, you end up having to cut payments and, by 10 to 15%. All right. That's not an acceptable option. So we're going to have to reform these programs to make them solvent, sustainable, secure. There's a way to reform Social Security that will exceed the expectation of every generation of Americans. People that are retired or close to retirement are not going to be affected to any meaningful extent. The younger you are, the better off you are financially, the more you'll be affected. The sooner we do it, the better, because the less you have to do, the more transition time, the more certainty that is provided. The bigger changes are going to have to be made to the healthcare system, because we spend way more than any other country as a percentage of our economy and per person, and we get below average results. And we're going to need major transformational reforms in our healthcare system, because the current system costs too much and generates inadequate outcomes from a societal standpoint.
Hey, Dave, I had one other quick question for you, and it revolves around something that was cut significantly, and I kind of alluded to it on the news show earlier, World Edition and everything like that. I'm under the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, and I can't remember if you had military background or if you had friends with military background and all along those lines, but one of the things that seems to be happening, and even Nick has kind of alluded to it, is there is a lot of cuts in programs that probably need cutting, and I would even argue that that's okay that they are cutting them and everything, but they're cutting them and doing it. It's like having a bomb dropped on you without having any room or time to prepare for it. Because, and I'll use the example of the NEA, meaning the NEA is having some significant cuts and everything like that, but a lot of the museums and a lot of the galleries are not prepared for those cuts because they weren't given any advance notice that the cuts were coming. So I just wanted your take on that, because that's where I'm seeing some frustration from some of my art compatriots and everything, because they're going like, yeah, we know that we got to have these cuts and we know that they are coming, but we were expecting, like in the case of Pauli Murray, several $1 million, and then the several $1 million were yanked. So now they're having to scramble to try to come up with the several $1 million that they were promised and everything.
Well, the truth is that Trump knows that he's only got a 4-year term. Mm-hmm. He knows that he's got the Senate and the House that are controlled by his party right now. And he wants to get as much done as fast as he can get it done, especially before the midterm elections, because you don't know what the result of that's going to be and what the lineup will be with regard to trying to get things done that require legislation. At the same point in time, as I've said many times before, it's not just what you do, but how you do it.
Right.
All right. And, for example, in the case of DOGE, I'm all for cutting waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. I think an overwhelming percentage of Americans are. All right. But how you go about it matters. Okay. Right. And I think they haven't gone about it the right way. And more needs to be done. Also tariffs. I'm all for targeted and temporary tariffs to deal with abuses of the system, where somebody we don't have a level playing field, or they're using non-trade tariff barriers to try to hurt us, or dumping in our markets, or improperly subsidizing something that shouldn't be to undercut free and fair trade. But intellectually, I'm for reciprocity, but that's not what they're doing. And how they're going about it is very disruptive and very unsettling, and is creating a lot of volatility and a lot of uncertainty, if you will. And I'm all for, deporting illegal immigrants who have been or are criminals. I'm all for that. I'm talking about criminal activity, not just the fact they broke the law by coming into the country, which is illegal but not criminal, if you will. I'm all for that. But how you go about it matters, right? And so I think what's happening is a lot of people are very shocked and unsettled with regard to how quickly things are happening. And it's not just with regard to the groups that you're talking about, okay? Mm-hmm. It's also federal employees, mm-hmm. And also federal contractors.
Right.
They're very nervous. They're very unsettled about what's going to happen. I think, the process matters. You need to have clearly defined, consistently applied, and transparent criteria for what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you're finding.
Yeah.
And
Makes
in many cases, that hasn't happened, and
Yeah.
it needs to happen.
Yeah.
Dave, along those same lines and everything along those lines, just out of curiosity, he's also talking about turning a historical prison back into a historical prison, but I'm thinking that that's going to cost money just to upfit it and refit it, because he's saying that he wants to make Alcatraz, which is a historical film place, but known for many things in the film world and a number of other places, back into a federal prison. I don't know that it ever was a federal prison, but if it was,
It's a federal prison.
so what is your thoughts around that? Because I'm thinking that that's going to cost money even to refit it, because it's not been a prison for decades now.
It costs a huge amount of money, and given all the different laws that exist in California, it'll take a long time for that to get done, if it ever gets done.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. I saw that within the last 24 to 48 hours that he's talking about doing that. But there's a lot of times there's a difference between what you want to do and what you actually get done.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
David, what is your thoughts on the war in Ukraine? He said he was going to end it like in a day. Well, we're past 100 days. It looks like this war is not going to end anytime soon. Then I want to listen to what Sasha has to say.
Yeah, I'll give you my thoughts, but I really want to hear Sasha. Okay.
Yeah, he keeps up to the date with us almost every day.
Yeah. Look, this was kind of an example of Doge, right? Overpromised and underdelivered. Okay. But in both cases, both with regard to Russia, Ukraine, and Doge, it's incomplete because, we don't know how it's going to end. We just know where it is now as compared to what people said they wanted to try to accomplish. My view is that Putin's the problem. Putin hasn't decided whether or not he wants to end this conflict or not. But so I'd like to hear a little bit more from Sasha about what his thoughts are. Because it's dragging out. It's likely to drag out indefinitely, and people are dying every day. And this is a matter I know that he's concerned about. I and others are concerned about. So, Sasha, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are the following. First of all, Trump underestimated the difficulties of reaching the peace between Russia and Ukraine. There is so much hatred between Russian and Ukrainians. Now, from my perspective it's clear that Russia was aggressor in this conflict, in this war. And to terminate the war, it's not a question of efforts of both countries. It's a question of efforts of only one country, Russia. If Russia would stop its bombardment of Ukrainian cities and advances, or they're trying to do advances on the front, it doesn't work out. Ukrainian army is getting stronger and stronger by the hours. And I think that in that respect, I'm not so sure if it's in any favor of Europe and even US to stop this war. Let it just play out, and let's see how Russia will be taken apart by Ukrainian victory in the war, which will stop for not years, it's maybe forever, the threat of thermonuclear war, which has been for the last 80 years. It was a huge threat, and that threat could be stopped right now by Ukrainian army. And, Russians are now using donkeys in the front lines and the bicycles to attack. And it's they're just getting out of steam. And if oil will continue to plunge to $50, $55 a barrel, and Russian oil, so-called Ural, it sells for $10 less than Brent, for example, and Chinese and Indians are buying even for less money. So if United States would put, according to proposal of Senator Graham, 500 percent tariffs on India and China for buying Russian oil that would terminate all sales of Russian oil, and that was if Trump really wants to end the war right now, right there, just take the proposal of Lindsey Graham. That's the end of war very quickly. 2 weeks and the war is over, because they cannot sustain economically the situation, Russians.
Well, I think you're clearly correct that Russia was the aggressor here. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think you're also correct that Putin's the problem. Okay. You're also correct that the Russian economy relies on natural resources in general and oil in particular. When I first went to the Soviet Union in 1979, it was very clear to me that they were a third world nation, but for their military. I mean, it's third world. Okay. They've come a ways since then. Okay. But they are not a global economic power. And they never will be a global economic power. So the only thing that they really have is over 5,000 nuclear weapons. And the biggest concern that I've always had is not about strategic nuclear weapons, because it's mutually assured destruction. The thing that I get concerned about is if Putin gets in a corner and it looks like he's going to lose, then would he use tactical nuclear weapons? That's the thing I've always been the most concerned about. And that should be prohibited too, but I don't think it would be treated by the world the same as strategic nuclear weapons. And that's what I get concerned about.
Dave, I remember in my childhood in Ukraine, in Odessa, one of the major transportation trucks were American Studebackers. They're from Second World War, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I remember in the 70s, I left in the mid-70s, they were still in working conditions, and they were doing their job, and they were at premium. Any organization that had access to Studebaker thought that about themselves, how great they are and how clever they are, and they have 2 Studebakers. Another company had 3 Studebakers, and another one had 5 Studebakers. They were still in working conditions and doing their job.
Well, I'll tell you, you ought to go to Havana.
Yes, I've been there.
Havana, yeah, I have too, because they've got a lot of old American cars that they've kept in shape, and they're still using them every day.
And they paint them and they look after them. Really.
Yeah, they do. They take care of them. And well, unfortunately today, there are many manufacturers, of various different products that have built-in obsolescence. They basically don't want it to last for a long time, because they want you to buy the newest and latest version, if you will. And they may not be made, and I'm not necessarily just talking about cars. I'm talking about products in general. They may not be made with the same quality and reliability that they were in the past. I mean, one last thing while we're talking about nuclear weapons, which I hope we never have to see used anywhere again, right? I remember when I was in elementary school, and I was in Miami, Florida, okay, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. You will recall the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember when we had to practice the duck and cover routine, where you had to get underneath your desk, duck and cover. And pardon my language, but they forgot the last part. Kiss your keister goodbye.
They did the same thing where I grew up in Tampa, Florida. We were close to MacDill Air Force Base. And the thing is, so we practiced duck and cover in case there was a nuclear attack on MacDill Air Force Base. We're supposed to go underneath our chair and then cover your head and then hope for the best. Of course, we didn't know that was frankly wouldn't do you any good, but it made people feel like they would do good. But the problem I have is the economic problem with the war in Russia, Ukraine. Remember, that was the same problem we had in the war in Iraq. It's very costly for the United States to get involved in wars and without a revenue source, which created our run up in the debt. And then COVID creates another run up in the debt, and the crisis of 2008 creates another run up in the debt. So, David, here's the problem. There's always a crisis. It'll take place. It'll be manufactured or not. And then there'll be a run up in the debt. Are we going to have a problem that there's going to be another, quote, crisis in the next several years, which will create another run up in the debt, which puts us behind the 8 ball? What are your thoughts on that?
The constitutional amendment concept that I've talked about that's focused on debt to GDP basically would do two things. One, it would create an overall limit on how much debt as a percentage of the economy the U.S. federal government can take on, absent a formal declaration of war.
Mhm.
Last time that we did that was World War II. We've had a lot of conflicts since then, but so that's when the existence of the country is threatened. Beyond that, it creates a lower target to be able to hit in 10 to 15 years, lower than where we are now, because where we are now is too high. And it gives an exception for either formal declaration of war, all right, or an unexpected emergency. Underline the word unexpected emergency with a supermajority vote in both the House and the Senate on a year-by-year basis, okay? Because part of the problem that we have is people want to declare things to be an emergency that aren't really an emergency, and they're clearly not unexpected. There are things that, and so I think, this is another example of things that we need to do to reform our system and controls. Let me come back, if I can, to Ukraine for a second, and let's talk about an issue that relates to trade, that relates to Ukraine, et cetera. We've now penned this agreement, Sasha, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this agreement with regard to rare earth minerals, et cetera. And one of the things that the United States and the West has really made a strategic error on is it's become way too dependent on China for rare earth materials and for other materials that are necessary to make prescription drugs, right? And pardon me one second. And it's not just the materials; it's also the capacity to be able to turn them into a product, if you will. And so, yes, we've signed this agreement with Ukraine, and I think that's good for both of us. But on the other hand, until you have stability, you're probably not going to be sending a lot of Americans over there, to do things. And then, secondly, what percentage are we talking about as to compared to what the need is? People talk about the fact that Ukraine's got the second most rare earth minerals of Europe, but Europe doesn't have much. And last time I looked, China had 70 to 80% plus of rare earth materials for the world.
David, it's not only the quantity of what China has, it's also its ability to process,
Exactly right,
manufacture, and sell, market and sell finished products. And they're doing that extremely well. Now, it seems to me that this agreement was made to satisfy Trump. It was the last day of his 100 days in the office. I think this is why it was signed. Because to have it as a real agreement, well, listen, in my professional life, I used to have some agreements and work on them and so on. This agreement lacks a lot of fundamental things. For example, a schedule of payments. This agreement is dead. It's a stillborn agreement because if nobody invests any money, nothing will be processed, nothing developed, nothing absolutely. So you have to do the feasibility study because all these maps, they're coming from the Soviet Union times. So they never been really done by Western technologists and scientists. There's nothing to confirm or deny anything. There is no schedule of payments, as I mentioned before. It's so hollow. It's so lacking. Even U.S. now under this agreement is obliged to help Ukraine with defense. What has to do development of rare earth metals with helping Ukraine with defense? It's two separate issues. You want to help Ukraine, help it. If you don't want, okay, you don't help. Now, you want to follow up on this agreement, then make it a real professional agreement. The schedule of payment, so much you have to pay in the first year and second and so on. Then schedule of work. It has to be done under this agreement and payments. It has to be complete. Geology study, feasibility study, what technology to be used and where and so on. It's so preliminary. It's almost like a blank, like just a frame agreement. It means really nothing to tell you.
I think it's like agreement in principle. Let me ask you a quick question,
Yeah.
Sasha, about it. Where are the rare earth minerals? Are they in Russian occupied territory or are they in Ukrainian occupied territory?
Well, since the latest geological map were made 30, 40 years ago during the Soviet Union time, and I'm not sure what technologies are used to qualify this the number of minerals, the quantity of these minerals. I'm not so sure about their technology, how valid it is. I remember our company got 15 or 1,700 square kilometers in Republic of Guinea to develop diamond production. So I went there with the geologist, a Canadian geologist, and we had to come up with some even just preliminary study where those diamonds could be located and quantity, and just as much information as possible. It was our first, and now I can say for sure it's the last trip to Republic of Guinea. So what's happened there? Okay, so we had contacts with Ambassador of Guinea in Washington. So we got all the green light to go ahead and so on. So we arrived there. Next day, we were in the Ministry of Natural Resources of Guinea. It was some kind of a Chad, some kind of without electricity, 2 rooms structure. And so I've asked if they have a map of geological map of Republic of Guinea, so we could look at the map and at least to identify where we should look for. They said that, well, this map could be shown only by special permission or so on. Okay, so for $100 cash, we got special permission and map. So now this map, it was a really huge map, and 4 people had to carry this map because it would fall apart easily but just by touching it not carefully enough. So they brought this map and they put it on a large table. And the map was made by Soviet Union geologists in 1962. So guess how much we could trust. Okay, so I asked it, okay, can we at least make a scan of this map, picture of it? So, well, not really. It was 1994, so you couldn't use this,
You couldn't use your iPhone.
Yeah, no. It's still before the iPhone time. So they said, yeah, we can get you a special permission to take a scan of this map, but we don't have electricity here, so how are you going to scan it?
That sounds like Spain last week.
Yeah, but there is a failure for the last probably 80 years. Problem with electricity in Guinea.
So the bottom line is you don't know, and maybe we don't know.
Nobody knows
where these rare earth minerals are.
Nobody knows. Probably there are some rare earth minerals, but what if it will take $10 trillion to develop it and do feasibility study and research and everything else, and market is locked by China, probably not up to 90% is controlled by China. So take China as a partner. That's your best bet.
Well, we don't know where the minerals are, but we do know we're out of time. So I want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And we look forward, I guess, to the next 100 days and also the budget. We'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker.
See you.
Take care.
Take care.